Today we're talking about model and property releases for stock photography. I'll tell you when you need them, why you need them, and also when you don't need them. Let's go! Hey guys, welcome back. If this is your first time here, my name is Luca and I'm a stock photographer and videographer. I'm selling my photos and videos online on iStock and Getty Images, and I'm also making these videos about photography, stock photography, videography, camera gear and similar stuff, so if you like this kind of content, subscribe to my channel. Okay, today's topic is paperwork. So, model and property releases. This was probably the most requested video in the comments, so here we are. Also, if you have some other video suggestions, you can write them down in the comment section, because the more requested the video topic is, the more likely I'll do a video about it. Because there's a lot to cover here, I decided to split this topic into 3 videos. In the first one, I'll talk about what are releases, why we need them, when we need them, and also when we don't need them. In the second video, I'll talk about how to correctly fill paper releases, and in the third one I'll talk about digital releases, how to fill them and which app to use for that. So, what are model and property releases? A release is a signed contract that gives permission from an individual or property owner, allowing the use of images depicting that person or property, like a private home, a place of business, a copyrighted work of art or similar, for commercial purposes. And don't think about model and property releases as a stupid requirement that agency wants, but think of it as a contract that protects you as a photographer against lawsuits and other similar unwanted situations. Because I know cases when a model called the photographer and complained that he never agreed about selling images of him and demanded to remove all those images from a stock agency. But when you have a signed model release signed by you, model, plus witness, then you're legally protected. Also, for cases like that, I always keep all the emails and other forms of communication with models. I don't delete anything. Especially for models that I'm working with for the first time and when I'm traveling and so on. Luckily, until now I haven't got any problems, but you just never know. Now, when do you need and when you don't need model and property releases? And just a quick note here, all these things I'll talk about are specifically for iStock, because obviously I only upload to iStock. It's very similar for all other agencies as well, but there can be minor differences from agency to agency. I know some of them have their own releases and some don't require as detailed information as iStock. But as I've learned, model and property releases which iStock and Getty use are accepted by pretty much all other agencies, while releases from some other agencies won't be acceptable on iStock because there are certain fields that some releases don't have, but iStock requires them. Also, if you know about any agency that does not accept standard iStock model releases, write it down in the comments so we'll all know, and you'll also help the ones that are uploading to multiple sites. Okay, you need a model release every time you have a recognizable person in your image. So, if the person is recognizable, then you need a model release if you want to use your image commercially. Even if the face is not seen, so if the person is shot from behind, or if you just upload an image of a hand that has something recognizable on it, like a scar or a tattoo. And sometimes it's very hard to say if the person's recognizable or not, so the best way is to ask yourself, if that person in the image was you, would you recognize yourself? Would you know that that's you, or can that be anybody? It can be from context, clothes, people you were with, or some other thing. If you can say that's me in the image, then this kind of image would need a model release. So also if you're shooting yourself, your wife or your kids, you need to attach model releases for them. And for each shooting day you need to attach a new model release. Also, shoot date on model release has to match the EXIF date from the camera. So be sure you have the right date set in your camera. But there are some exceptions here. For self-portraits you can create one release and use it all the time. What's important here is that you write somewhere with capital letters that it's a self-release. Then you can use it whenever you like. And the second situation is if you go on a trip with your family, you can create a release with date range. So from here to then. But I think it's 5 days maximum. So you can have one release for your wife, for example, for 5 days. Just mark those dates clearly on the model release. And when it is okay to upload images without the release, you don't need it for close-up shots of body parts where there are no identifiable features on them. You don't need them for crowds. So if you shoot a crowd of people and none of them stands out, then you're okay to upload those images without model releases. Yeah, it's very hard to say how many people makes a crowd, and also if all the people are represented equally in the shot. That really depends from image to image. And also it depends on how the inspector sees it. I've had similar images rejected or accepted, so it's really hard to evaluate that. And also you don't need releases for editorial photos. So just a quick explanation on what editorial is. Images sold under editorial license can be used to cover newsworthy events for educational purposes and similar, but you can't use those images for commercial purposes. So, to promote your service or product, for example. So, you don't need releases for editorial purposes, but there are some rules and limitations which are not the topic of this video, and also I'm not very familiar with those because I don't shoot editorial content. Also, if you're a very communicative person and if you're okay to approach strangers and say, hey, I took this photo of you, can you sign a model release so I can sell this image online? Well, definitely do that. I know some people are like that and don't have any problems doing that, but I'm more introverted and just not that kind of a person, so I would not do that. But if you are, that's great. Just be sure to tell the person what you're doing and how the photo can be used and all that. Now let's see when you need property releases. You need a property release when the main subject of the image is a private home, business or organization. And you need it if it's shot from the street, from the grounds of the property or from the inside. So yeah, if you're shooting in your home, you need to attach a property release. We'll also cover some exceptions later. For famous properties or properties that are not privately owned, the ones where you probably won't be able to get a property release, it's a little bit harder. It's hard to know which buildings you can use commercially and which not. Eiffel Tower, for example, is totally fine for commercial use if it's shot during the day, but at nighttime, when the lights are on, you can't sell or use those images for commercial purposes because the lighting setup is copyrighted. Well, except if you shoot a really wide city scene and the tower is just a small part of it, then it's okay. There's a webpage that can help you a lot with property releases. It's called Intellectual Property Wiki. It was created by Getty Images and there are a lot of entries, so you can see some of the problematic properties. So, if you travel to Spain, for example, you can type in Spain and the search will show you some problematic properties from Spain. For example, Casa Milà, I'm not sure if I pronounced it correctly, but yeah, anyway, it's a famous building in Barcelona created by Gaudí, and as you can see here, the building is trademark protected. And you can also read that content featuring Casa Milà is not suitable for commercial use, however, may be suitable for editorial use. So, if you're shooting a model in front of the building or the building itself, it will be rejected if you want to sell it under a commercial license. And there are tons of similar entries. But there are also tons of problematic properties that are not in here, so also keep that in mind. You'll have to do your own research to be sure. Also, you need a property releases for all designs, artworks, logos and other similar things, or you'll have to retouch them out of your images. That's why when we do a photo shoot, we often create our own designs, like graphs for business meetings, apps for mobile devices, labels for champagnes or jam, posters, and similar. Of course, all the images that are included in those designs have to be our own. And that way I can sign a property release for that design and there won't be any copyright issues with that. And also it looks much better than just having a blank area there. And when you can upload images without property release. Okay, so we talked about landmarks and those not privately owned properties, so you'll have to do your own research about those. But usually if those are just small parts of a cityscape shot, that will be okay without property release. But for private homes, for example, if you're shooting a street, of course, you don't need property releases for all the buildings there. If there are 3 or more properties like that in the image is okay without releases. Except if one of the properties is clearly the focus of the image, so if it stands out too much. Another situation where you don't need a release is if the area of the property where you're shooting is generic enough. For example, a simple kitchen will usually be fine without property release, or if you're shooting narrow, not so wide, so there's not much around, or if the background is blurred enough, that will usually also be okay. But if you're shooting in a private home, you probably know the owner, so you should ask him to sign a property release, because I just think it's always good to have it. I attach property release every time, even if the image would be okay without it. And another example is, of course, editorial content. Yeah, but you can't just walk into someone's house, shoot a bunch of images and upload them as editorial. If you're shooting indoors or in some places where you'll have to pay to get in, then you'll need a permission even for editorial use. But from the outside, it's usually fine without. Again, if you'll be shooting editorial content, check the rules first so you won't have problems and images that you won't be able to use. And that's it for today. If you have any questions regarding releases or you have a suggestion for a video, let me know down in the comments, and of course like the video if you found it useful, and if you haven't already, click that subscribe button down below. Thanks for staying all the way, and stay tuned for my next video, which will be about how to correctly fill paper releases. Yeah, see ya.